we're training our emotions here, and they're inherently tied in to our mind and our body and where those emotions are held. So, number one, I know that if I can just shut my mouth, I can move my fear base.
Hello, I'm Wendy Welton, and I'm so pleased you're joining me for the Make Movement Matter podcast, created for those who want to learn more about the wide world of movement and be inspired by individuals who've made transformations through the positive force of movement in their lives. Having gone from moving without thought to being fearful of even small daily movements due to chronic pain, I'm intrigued by the effect fear has on our movement. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Julie Angel, who coaches midlife women to help them increase their movement confidence, among other things. Her knowledge came from an earlier part of her career when she was filming people in the world of parkour, which inspired her book about them, entitled Breaking the Jump. Watching them made her face her own fears and informed part of the MAPS movement system she now coaches and lives by. We started with a discussion about why we have fear, whether we can ever get rid of it, or whether it can be used as a positive force.
Fear is one of our greatest survival protection instincts. It's the early alarm, it's the smoke alarm, it's the carbon monoxide alarm, it's the engine light in your car. It's the thing that signals to us, this is something out of the norm for whatever situation we're in. So every cell in our body has an innate will to survive. And without these fear warning systems, we would just be kind of presuming like, well, everything is fine. So to kind of understand the value of fear, you have to look at, well, what's counterpoint to that? And if there's no fear, then it means everything's fine. And if everything's fine, you're presuming that you don't need to ever do anything differently, or that there isn't something, we're part of the natural world. We're an animal. We are, although some people may say, oh, we're at the apex. It's like, well, put me in the middle of the savannah and I think the lion would have something different to say about that. So there are things to fear. There are, and it's not just, other species kind of fears. So we need to be able to fear other people. Not every, there is stranger danger. There are predators. There are sociopaths. Not everyone is well and happy and kind. There are environmental threats. So it's a threat warning system. And what's really interesting about fear is that it's bio-individual. It's not always rational. And the subject or the actual threat doesn't have to be real, but how we experience it and the neurochemistry that happens downstream is real, regardless of the reality of a perceived or imagined threat. The chemistry is still the same.
So we really don't want to get rid of it, do we?
Never.
Because then all hell breaks loose.
Well, I mean, there's, I want to be warned. I want to know when something's off. I want to know when someone is off. So this is our gut instinct. This is our gut brain, which is really, really tuned into fear. So everything from, like, do you get butterflies in your tummy, or there's, you open the door and for some reason you're just like, I just wanted to shut that door. Or you're in a car park or you're going into the lift and there's one person stood in that lift and you can't rationalize it, but you're like, I don't want to go in the lift. And here's the thing, we shouldn't go in the lift and we should close the door and we should stop being so polite for fear of upsetting people, because there's a lot of societal norms tied into these fears and presumptions around how we should behave and what's rational and what isn't. I mean, even everything from, we train children to be aware of strangers and then we take them to go and sit on this big old portly gentleman with a big beard and a hat who they've never seen before and give him a hug.
And actually their reaction, I remember my youngest,
terrifying,
absolutely freaking out. I mean, they don't sit on the knee anymore. That's clearly not allowed, but they stand next to him and they are freaking out. And it's understandable. And in a way, thank goodness. That's the
We've trained them
right
for that. Stranger danger,
response.
stranger
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
remember at school, there was a kind of phase of like, if there's a man at the gates and he asks you if you want to go and see his cute new puppies,
Puppies.
it was always about the puppies,
It was
and it was
always
always like,
puppies.
I don't ever like, I love puppies, but never say you want to go and see a stranger's puppies. And as
Yeah.
adults, we can go, of course. But when you're 6, it's like, oh, puppies, they're so
Yeah.
um, so yeah, predators, threats, environmental,
And
human.
it's interesting because, even from that discussion, we've ranged from, children right through to adults. And yet there's kind of a push-pull relationship with fear the whole way through, even at the most basic level, where I suppose if you're talking about childhood, I think that's an interesting place to be, because we receive a lot of subconscious messages like more conscious messages like the, stranger danger. But then there's lots of subconscious ones where, for example, someone perhaps in our family or someone who's an important person around us starts to talk in a certain way that makes us fear something that perhaps there is no need for, because they are projecting their fear onto you. And you don't know that's happening. It's an early stage. I'm thinking things like, oh, don't climb the tree, you might fall.
Step away from the edge. Step away from the edge.
Step away
Get
from the
down from
edge
there. Get down from
because
there's
you
the
might
classic. Yeah.
fall. And yet there's the beautiful saying about, yes, I might fall or I might fail. Yes, but you might fly. And I love that. Again, it's the two sides where, and I remember seeing my middle one, who was an avid climber, climbing the tree. We've got one tree in the garden that's climbable, and not kind of noticing he'd scrambled up there and just seeing a little head way up and having to do okay, I'm all right with this. This is fine. This is fine. He will be safe. He's got up there, therefore he knows how to get down. And trying to resist the urge of saying, be careful. What a silly thing to say. It's a bit like saying, don't worry. It's impossible. But it's amazing how perhaps those childhood subconscious signals that are sent out affect us probably later in life, and perhaps make us put our own brakes on too early.
Definitely. So, I mean, there's some theories that, most of our sort of behaviors and habits are formed by the age of 7. We're
Wow.
just kind of sponges up until 7. So if you're in an environment where you have overly, and we see this with pets, you look at, a dog's behavior and you look at the owner's behavior, there's a lot of same that happens for a lot of people.
Mhm.
If you have a kind of shouty, uptight, tense person, chances
I
are
love
the
the way
dog
Pax just walked to the background there
Pax
on
is chill.
cue. Pax the dog, by the way. Yes,
And
I
dogs.
love that timing.
Um, then a lot of the time, the dog will be anxious. So we learn, these are learned behaviors. So if you do, if you're in an environment where your family was like, oh, let's go and look at the edge. Oh, that'll be fun. That's really cool because we're all capable. Everything's going to be fine. Then you're going to have this sense of, well, the edge is not something to fear.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are in an environment where your peers are saying like, oh, wait,
Yeah.
oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Then you're like, okay, like, because these are your guides in life. They are guiding you. They are teaching you. And we carry that. And it's much harder to unlearn than
Yeah.
to learn, because we're just these sponges that are just learning these societal norms and cues from our family, from our teachers, from our friends. It's like when you suddenly have a friend who's very adventurous relative to you, and you're kind of like, oh, okay. And then you gradually dip your kind of toe in the water and you start to realize like, wow, for me, that's something really extreme. And for them, they're like, oh, that's a nothing. That's not
It's
anything I
nothing.
would
Yeah.
even like think about. So
And
there's a very relative scale, and our unconscious learning and unlearning is sort of unfolding relative to our environment and what we're exposed to over time.
very much. And I think that your awareness of your own fear is an interesting one. You said before about how fear can be irrational, and yet therefore the opposite, meaning it can be rational. So the rational is you're on an edge, it's incredibly high, there's a wind blowing, you're in a more dangerous situation. You've put yourself there. Whereas the more irrational fears, where I shouldn't do this just in case such and such happens. How do you think, as an adult, we can separate those out? How can you know when you're verging on the irrational rather than the rational?
There's a lot of difference between risk and danger. And a lot of the time, whenever we talk about danger and fear, we should also talk about the probability of risk. And that's where this kind of rational, unrational, or irrational, conscious, unconscious mind comes into it. So, and again, it can be really individual. So there can be a situation where, I have friends who climb, and so they do a lot of bouldering, they do buildering. So this is climbing without ropes, without support. When they're bouldering, they have a little mat at the bottom, and they have friends kind of spotting them. But also, some of them just go on their own and do things. And they are very, very experienced, very equipped, attuned climbers. So is there an implicit danger that, well, when you're at that top edge and you miss that hold, that you could slip? Yes, that's a probability. But if we look at their preparedness relative and how that feeds into their risk, so how well prepared and trained are they to both? We can only control our emotions and our physical capacities. We can't control the environment. So 2 out of the 3, how well versed are they? How well prepared are they, both mentally and physically? And therefore, how much does that feed into the likelihood of there being a clear and present danger with a high probability of happening?
Yeah.
So, if you took someone for a walk and on a hike, and there was, you go to the beach and there's some cliffs and there's a drop. So if someone had never been there before, they were, I don't know, visually impaired, they had really slippery shoes, they were uncoordinated and gung-ho, there is a much higher probability or risk, perhaps, that they may put themselves in greater risk than someone who knows the area, has been there before, has really good grip, has more sensory input. And I know, like, oh my God, I'm just thinking like, oh God, what have I said? And someone's going to say like, oh, she's saying this about this. And it's like, you know what I mean? Common
There's
sense.
always someone can say something. So
Yeah.
I
But
totally
just
get
to
you.
say, we can, like I can look at the waves and assess whether I should go out surfing.
Yeah, it's all at your own level, isn't it? So that
And
you're
it's
giving an example of something that
yeah,
may seem extreme to others. And
yeah,
yet we could be thinking about the same risk in terms of climbing up some rocky steps
yeah,
that are slippy,
yeah,
and whether we use the handrail or not. It doesn't
yeah,
matter what the level is. It's,
yeah.
as you say, about the awareness of what you're doing and how prepared you are.
And whether you think, sometimes like I'll look at the waves and I'll be like, I have no business out there today.
Yeah.
That's not for me. Or I'm on a walk and like, there's little stones and you can go across the river and it's like, I'm really tired and I've been really
Yeah.
clumsy all morning. Like,
This is
might,
not a
might
good
not,
plan.
not the day.
Yeah.
This is not the
And
day.
actually, sometimes when you're going through those moments, in your mind's eye, you do, and is this that fear popping in? You do see it going wrong.
Mhm.
And I'm really quite a clumsy person, and I'd love to say that it's not me as a person, but um, as I think you know, I'm hypermobile in certain joints, and that means that I'm not quite as good with knowing quite where something is in space. My body is in space, so I'm more likely to bump into doorways and drop things a lot, and sometimes drop things down my head, but we won't talk about that. And my husband is regularly okay. He now knows when I give him a certain look and I say, "Yeah, I've banged to this, or I've dropped to that, or I've broken to that." I'm like, but it's not me. It's because I'm mobile. But
Yeah,
in my
yeah.
mind's eye, because I have those things,
Mhm,
that actually increases my fear,
mhm,
because I am more likely to think, yeah, I have a greater propensity to break things and potentially myself if I
mhm,
do that. And I have to really work against that. Um, because I know it's that fear thing coming in. And yet I know that I also have the skills not to be capable, to be fine.
yes.
And it's interesting. It's that knowing yourself and that connection again. I mean, interesting to talk about the mind body connection, where um how connected are you to your body? How much do you know um about how capable you actually are? How strong do you feel to do the thing? How stable, how coordinated, and so on. And crossing that path on the stones, you need quite a few skills to do that. It may look like absolute child's play, and yet to many that really is taking some level of skill that if you've not practiced before, you're going to fear it, because you haven't got the experience of the fact that you are capable of doing that. um I want to move into your experience with parkour, which is a word which may make some listeners go, pardon? Because
What?
power, because it's an unusual thing for uh, if I'm allowed to say, a midlife woman like yourself, like myself, to be talking about as one of their skill sets, really. So I'd love you to share with us a little bit about how you got into it, why you got into it, and then how it helped you see fear.
hmm So parkour is a way of moving through the environment and overcoming obstacles. So it can be, your kind of how do I get from A to B? It could be outside, it could be in nature. It's been really popularized in the media through people doing it in urban environments because it looks like Spider-Man. It looks like this is kind of like, oh, like the city ninja type of thing. And at its most spectacular, people, you do have people jumping across rooftops. And but the most everyday thing is people are training on very low level objects, whether it's kind of logs or railings or walls and things like that. But it's this very playful way of reimagining your environment, reimagining how you can use things in ways they weren't designed for. And it's also built on this kind of French military physical education system of being strong to be useful and being strong to last. It isn't, its roots aren't in anything about being spectacular or extroverted. It's about a very kind of practical, can you scale that wall? Could you crawl under this thing? If you needed, if a dog was chasing you, could you scramble up and get over that wall? Um, but it's also an invitation to invite in challenge, and you get to see who you are in the moment when you do that. So it is this very incredible kind of tool for self-knowledge. And that makes it actually an introverted practice, as opposed to, even though we see a lot of videos, because it has this very spectacular side to it as well. So, as well as being a movement coach, I'm a documentary filmmaker. And back when I was 34, I'm now 54. Oh my God, 20 years ago. I'd moved to London, and just before that, I'd actually been out here in Southern California, where I now live. And myself and a friend had made a documentary film about people who search and find round bottom swimming pools and skateboard in them. So the
Ah,
documentary is called Chlorine. And this was really my kind of first foray into, I had friends who were skateboarders and surfers. I'm from Plymouth. There's, lots of those kind of lifestyle sports. Um, but it was really the first time of spending a lot of time around people who got really excited about environments that had never excited me. Like, I'm excited about swimming pools with water in, not
yeah.
empty ones. I'm excited, about kind of like the nice, safe looking areas of town. And these were like, no, let's go down Route 66 and all the bankrupt empty houses and jump fences and clean the pool and go in and da 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 da. And so that had kind of opened my eyes, and I'm a kind of rebel archetype. So I liked the kind of lawlessness of it. I
Yeah.
liked the adventure was really fun. And to me, they were artists who just brought this kind of physicality to it. And I was a sporty teenager who stopped moving at 16. Classic trajectory.
A classic
Really sporty. I
girl
was
of
like Plymouth
conservative as well.
Athletics Club, captain of the netball team,
Oh,
loved
wow.
swimming. I was really active. Then I sat on my ass. And
Why
I
does
just
that
went,
happen? It's so sad.
yeah. And hopefully things are different for young women these days, but I don't see it, to be honest. I actually don't see it. And I just all my energy went into my creative endeavors and identity. And so I was back in the UK. I moved to London, and this was in 2003. Then I was studying visual anthropology. So, how to document kind of other cultures and people in ways where there's this feedback loop and you do it over a long period of time.
Oh,
So,
fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, I still to
Wow.
this day, I love it. So, it's not about me filming and being the expert. It's about me filming and then showing the people I filmed and going, what do you think about that? And then them going like, no, you don't understand what we're doing because the way you filmed it, like
Ah.
you kind of cut it before we landed. And unless I see the landing, I don't know the quality of that movement. And you're like, okay.
Ah.
I thought the bit that really mattered was that pretty bit when you're in the air in the middle. And they're
The
like,
impressive
nah.
bit.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
spectacle.
Yeah.
So, and it was like, nah, because unless I see how they land and get up, I don't know if they can move again. You can fly through the air, but you can land like a bag of potatoes and get up and sprain your ankle and like not move
And
for the
break
next
your
3
bones.
months.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the air, someone go like, wow, that person's amazing. And like you see them land and they go, that person is not amazing in the slightest. That person is reckless. That person is ill prepared. That person is X, Y, and Z. So there's this feedback loop. So that informs you how to document them and their culture in a way that someone else can be able to understand. So it's about a celebration of difference and how one group can understand another. And you're just this audio visual communicator who speaks both languages. So you have to be inside the culture you're documenting, but you have to be outside enough so that you can still relate to the other people who are outside, so you can do things in a way that they understand.
And yet you had no parkour experience. Am I right? Before you started filming.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So my experience in parkour, so I ended up signing up for this audio visual PhD at Brunel University. I'd only ever written 1,000-word essay before. My supervisors had great faith, but I had like 10, 15 years of documentary filmmaking. So I started documenting and filming this kind of very young parkour scene in London at the time. So I started filming in 2004. I had no intention of moving. No intention of. I was very fixed in my identity. I was like, hi, my name's Julie and I'm an independent filmmaker. And I traveled, and so I kind of thought I was like kind of brave and cool because I traveled and I was a filmmaker. And because I had this athletic past, I kind of thought, I could still relate to the movement, even though these were movements that weren't familiar to me, but they were familiar when we went to Torquay and did a shoot and they were running around on big boulders. I was like, well, this is like Dartmoor. And they kind of, how I moved, even like with the camera on these rocks was just, it was second nature to me because I'd grown up running up and down the moors, and never thinking kind of anything of it. But when you're around people who want to move, it makes you want to move. And because of this style of visual anthropology, I was spending a lot of time with these people. It wasn't like, oh, we go and film for one day and then I'll see you in 3 months' time. It was like several times a week. You really become part of a community and you find a role in that community. And my role was this kind of documentary filmmaker. And I was kind of like getting itchy feet. But also, I was filming people who were 15 years younger than me, who were the oldest of that group. I was the only female when we were out and about, and they were encouraging. I have to say, this group of young men, they'd be like, "Oh, come on, Julie, have a go," and I'd be like, No.
Thank you. I'm fine behind my camera.
Yeah, and I did. I really hid behind the camera. And then one day we were filming in these little circular walls in Elephant and Castle in London. And I was stood up on a wall, and I could either like put the camera down, climb down from the wall, walk across, put the camera up and climb up the other wall. Or I could do this one, what they call a precision jump, like jump from one wall to the other and kind of just carry the camera with just like wee little like leap kind of step. And I was like, yeah, fuck it. Like, I thought no one was looking. And so I did it. And one of them went, oh, Julie did parkour. And I was like, no, like really like shy and embarrassed. And then a few months later, and there was also no organized structure. So even if I had been someone who was like, okay, guys, I want to learn this. Can you show me and train me? Number one, none of them really were trainers. And it wasn't until a guy called Francois Mottop, or known as Forrest, he joined the group. And he was a personal trainer. He was he'd been a French professional goalkeeper in football. I think he'd done competitive swimming at a national level as well. He was a personal trainer. Like, I trusted Forrest to train me.
Right.
I didn't trust the other.
And that's an essential ingredient, isn't it?
I don't feel safe with them.
Yeah. You need to feel safe to have someone take you
to be my guide
out of that comfort zone and eke forward.
Yeah, to be scalable, and just because someone is an inherently natural athlete themselves has nothing to do with them being a good coach.
No.
And also, someone who has found things really, really easily can't always relate to someone who's scared of everything and finds nothing easy. So Forrest came onto the scene, and there was a class. There was like a structured, like, be at this location at this time class. And I was like, okay. And this was 6 months in. And I went, I cried and died. Like,
so you had no protection of the camera. You had no thing to use as the excuse to say, I can't do that right now, I'm filming.
No, and I did, even for the next 10 years at parkour events, where I was like half joining in, half filming, I would use my camera every time to be like, oh, I'm tired, that's a bit scary. I'd be like, oh, I better shoot this. And I would just go and think, or if I got tired, I'd be like, just got to go and check batteries. Like, I've got, as Vic, with my friend would say to me, like, you've got more excuses that are pregnant now. And it's like, yeah, I can get out of stuff. And a camera gives you, it's incredible the kind of power you have when you have a camera. It's amazing what people will say yes to when you have a camera. So, oh, excuse me, can I just go there? Can I film that? Can I do that? Yeah. It's extraordinary. And whereas if you didn't have the camera,
the vulnerability without it, you had then experienced in the class, because it was almost probably like you were naked, because it was your usual armor.
Yes. And it was also a new identity of my relationship with the people I was filming. Was I'm someone who's documenting you. I can actually control how you're represented visually. And there's a feedback loop of trust there. And then suddenly, no, you're the authority. And I'm wanting to cry in front of this obstacle. Or like I'm sweating and dying, and also to say, like, I was like the runt of the litter in all the movers. So at this first class, there was another woman who's 1 week older than me. But the difference was with the wonderful, amazing Karen Palmer is she didn't stop moving at 16. She carried on moving. So Karen she's like, oh, I do a zillion sports. Oh, I do like squash and athletics and da 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 da. She came into parkour with a physical base, with a bravery, with a passion, she had fire in her belly for parkour. Like, she saw it spoke to her, and she was like, I'm doing that.
And confidence in her body as well, I presume.
Yes.
So because she knew how capable it was in lots of different ways, where if you hadn't tested that,
she was testing it in all her other sports. which doesn't mean that she didn't test it in parkour and she didn't test it in new ways, because she
It's a
did.
different way.
And she had incredible bravery and equal amounts of fear. Our journeys were different though, and everyone's journey is different. And what was really interesting for me is I still had a little bit of sporting ego. My 16-year-old self still thought I would be quite capable. And so it was really humbling and shocking to go like, shit, where did all this fear come from? I knew that I wasn't physically strong. I was kind of skinny fat, so I didn't look any different. But I had no muscle. I would sit in the car next to these athletes, and we were all like, I remember one time we were on a shoot to Paris, and we were all scrunched in the back of the car, and like their legs were like bricks. And I remember like pushing my thighs and being like, it's soft. Just like no muscle, just really like really, really soft. And when everyone's wearing baggy clothes, you can't see, like, these people are ripped. Their musculature is very developed. But although I knew I didn't have that, I wasn't prepared for the level of fear that exposed itself. And I realized, like, wow, unless we consistently invite in challenge and we are flexing this emotional muscle of understanding fear, managing our emotions so that we can manage fear, because fear is going to be present. When fear isn't present, I'm really worried about people. And I've only ever, in like 15, 20 years of both documenting and then coaching people, seen two people who lack what I would say is an adequate amount of fear. And one was a woman, and she was just gung-ho about everything. And it's very rare. You have to kind of like rein someone as an adult back in. Most of us are just overly cautious.
That's
because
my father,
we've stopped.
actually.
Yeah, we've stopped.
Sorry,
Was he gung-ho?
I was going to say he definitely has a very different level of perception of risk to most other people.
Yeah.
And so just to chip in with, I would have him pushing, saying, well, why not? And my mum probably became almost more anxious and fearful than she already was, because she was having to counteract
witness
him.
is so push pull.
Yeah. And actually, so I don't know where I landed in the end of that.
Yeah,
but you're right. When you meet someone like that, it is it's a little bit scary, because you're not quite sure if
can
they
manage
are
it? Do they know what they're doing?
Yeah.
Is this going to end well?
Are they aware of what those risks are? And is it calculated? Is it rational?
Yeah.
Can I ask you about the parkour fear when you were in that first class, and you came probably with huge amounts of fear because it was the unknown as much as anything. And we can have such huge fear. We can create such stories in our minds about what could happen or how it's going to be. And often then when we're in the situation, it's not quite so bad. It's not as bad as we thought. Was there, sort of by the end of the class, was there a feeling of that? Was that, and also, did your coach you about fear and working with your fear? Was that part of what you were doing to help you physically?
By the end of the class, all I felt was joy and fun and elation.
Yeah.
It was, I was on a high. I remember like not being able to sleep when I got back to the house, and I was just like, oh, that was amazing. And then the next day, even though I'd been, around parkour and filming it and editing it, so really watching, not just kind of, I would spend like, say, 3 hours of an afternoon with some people, but then I would then spend, another 15 hours replaying and watching that. So I was getting a huge amount of kind of mirror neurons of exposure to this, but embodying and doing movements, even though, like they were doing this and I was doing this, like I was doing like a 5% of visually what they were doing. But fear is relative, and how we move our body through an environment is all relative. And, for me, like, how big is your jump is the most boring, uninteresting aspect of parkour.
Right.
It's what did you experience? What did you go through? What did you learn about yourself in the moment? So at the end of it, I felt incredible sense of achievement. It was fun. It was exhilarating. It kind of woke me up in life. It felt
Wow.
wonderful. And during the lesson, I was always made to feel safe. I was always made to feel that there was positive reinforcement. You can do this, Julie. You've got this. You've got this. It's
Yeah.
okay. And in equal measure, like, just smile and do it. Just smile and do it. Smile and do it. And you see all these other people doing it. And I have a very overactive imagination. And what I know is that the longer I wait and hesitate,
Oh, yeah.
the worse the anxiety is. So even if there's something that I really, really, really don't want to do, I'm like, can I go first? I'm like, get it done.
Yes.
If I choose
That's
to
so
do
true.
something, I just want to get it done. And also what I found in a lot of subsequent parkour lessons, especially outside, and if it was, I'm really scared of heights. So anything that was kind of felt uncomfortable to me with heights. And if we were like, just like walking on a wall, and say the wall was going up and getting higher and higher, if I was behind someone who did the tiniest wobble, I would just like, I would, my own physical competence would deteriorate relative to the person in front of me. Like, there was this huge physical empathy. And so I was always like, I wanted to go behind the best person. I wanted to go behind or go after the most competent, successful example. The more I saw people who weren't like the idea or the ideal, the worse my performance was. And it's something that I realized, it's something that really worked for me. So anytime there was something, especially like with vaulting, and a railing, where you're just like, so you have this very small thing to hold on to and to go over. And in my mind, this is how it plays out. Right. I'm going to approach this thing. I'm going to go up. I'm going to clip my foot. I'm going to bang my leg. Then I'm going to clip my foot. And then I'm going to fall on my chin, and all my teeth are going to fall out.
Blood
And then I'm going to injure
everywhere.
my neck and sprain my ankle. And the consequences of that are that tomorrow I'm not going to be able to do that thing, and I'm going to not be able to do that thing. So I'm actually going to end up homeless. So I'm going to be homeless, toothless,
I think that's
in
called
pain, and my life,
catastrophizing.
and my life falls apart. And that would pretty much be the same story every single parkour class.
Really? Every time?
Every time. And it got to the point where I had to see the absurdity in comedy. And it's something I saw a lot of the other athletes, or like the really high level athletes do, is when someone was doing something and it was, say, like a first time, or it was very outside of someone's comfort zone, the more we used comedy and humor. And so, like, one of the, like, Johan would say to Thomas, he'd be like, oh, your teeth are going to fall out. That's going to happen.
Great.
But by saying it,
yes,
you realize, like,
everyone's thinking the same thing.
My teeth aren't going to fall out.
And everyone's having those worries. Everyone's having that panic.
Everyone is scared.
And if we verbalize it, we've shared it.
Yeah. And then it doesn't own you.
Feel better. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't own you. So, but this kind of, it generally involved, like, for some reason, teeth and chin always played a role.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I must be, I'm very,
there must be something there.
There must be something, like, I really don't want to lose my teeth. Or like, I can't be a filmmaker who turns up to a job and goes like, hi.
And it's like,
oh, here's old toothless Julie. But I remember going to a parkour class one evening, and we were doing wall runs. So you're training to run up a wall, and you'd get to the top, and then I wasn't strong enough to then, like, push down in a clean move. So I would graze the whole of my forearm here. And I was doing I remember flying to Japan the next day and doing a shoot with Konami video games. And it was 40 degrees Celsius when we arrived in Tokyo. And so we go to this meeting, and I'm sat at this meeting, and I go to roll up my sleeves because I'm really hot. And I look like someone who'd self-harmed. Like, both forearms were just cut and grazed and scratched. And then I was like, just let me roll. I'm just going to sweat it out and roll my sleeves down. So, you do get, there's some, you're going to get scratches and bumps and bruises.
But then that's probably a good thing in some ways, because if the most you've done is bruised, scratched,
you're fine.
And you've realized that, that's
you're
part
fine.
of the risk I'm taking, but I'm okay after that. And actually, I feel better because I did it, or I pushed through that initial fear to be able to try, even if I didn't achieve it, even if it wasn't, succeeding in the supposed goal of getting up the wall or whatever. You've still had a go. And presumably that helps that loop where the next time, even with the same fears, it's easier to push yourself over that starting line. And
definitely.
So to make this really relatable, because there's a lot of people out there, me being one of them, I like to do my mini parkour, which is going
Parkour is parkour.
Going on logs,
it's parkour.
my little balancing on logs, or
it's parkour.
Going up and down stairs in a funny way, whatever. But all of that is because it's something that is, those small things are not necessarily pushing my comfort zone, but they are trying to see ways to use my body differently. And I think there's a lot of people who, particularly as they age, and I don't know why that really is, but become fearful of using their body in those different ways. And yet, like we were saying, when you're a child, it's an innate thing to be climbing that tree or to scramble across the rocks, because you just know it looks fun. It's attractive to you. And yet, then when you're older, for some reason, you decide it's either too risky or, something might happen. And what that then does, I see in people, is that it closes them down in terms of their movement, which is obviously the key focus of our conversation, is about the fear of movement, really. It closes them down in their risk-taking, because they believe their capability is now lower because they haven't done something for so long, or because social norms say, well, that would make me look silly, so I'm not going to do that. And yet, when you then encourage someone to do something, they feel great. They perhaps don't feel quite as amazing as at the end of your parkour session, but they certainly feel a liberation from the shackles that fear can hold you down with. And I'm sure you see that in your coaching quite a lot. So if we think about that, say that midlife man or woman who hasn't explored or adventured for a while, perhaps has watched, which was entirely me for many years, watched their children playing and scrambling and doing things, and sat at the sidelines, sadly, and not got involved because they just didn't have that awareness that they could, or that it was good for them, or that it would make them feel great. What would you say to that person about analyzing their own fear and how to work with it?
So the first thing to say is that movement is emotional. And a lot of people, when they think about movement, they just talk about the physical side of movement. But movement is really, really emotional. And the emotions span everything from fear to excitement to joy to surprise
To pain.
to pain, and how people find joy in movement through these emotions is really varied. So I know people who just love to suffer in their movement. Like, they love that. I don't. I'm a kind of movement hedonist. I really like to feel kind of flow and joy. But I also know And I think it's really important, and it really, I wish kind of someone had said it to me at the beginning of my journey of reconnecting, is that we're a use it or lose it system. And the more we stop using something, the more we lose it. So we all, at some level, had this desire to explore and connect and move in our world in a more dynamic, 360 degrees strong, parkour-esque natural
Mm.
movement way. To It was always more interesting, if you're out on a walk, to walk on the log or to walk on that little wall than to just like walk nicely and stand there and da 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 da. Like, don't run, come here, walk next to me. Like, if you spend time with like younger kids, like they just want to sprint.
Yeah.
That, like, there's nothing more frustrating and boring than walking at a normal pace. It's just like, that is, oh, boring.
You
It's like,
sound like my teenagers.
I'm still such a kid inside. It's so boring because there's an energy there, and we're a use it or lose it emotional system as well. And when we stop seeking out challenge and we stop doing things that invite us to be brave, like I'll never forget one parkour class one evening, and we had to jump from one wall to another wall. Like, so you're standing on one and you jump and kind of catch the wall. They call it like a cat leap. So you land and kind of cling onto the second wall. And the lady next to me, it was her first or second class, and she just went, "Oh my God, no one's asked me to be brave in a really long time."
Right.
And so that has stayed with me for years. So we may be brave in facing fears in other aspects of our life, like, oh, you've got to do a presentation for your boss. You have to go and do some public speaking. You're really shy, but you need to go and meet that new group of people over there. Or you need to be brave to have this conversation with your spouse or something, or your bank manager. Like, so we face emotional fears, but we have this disconnect with the idea that our movement is emotional, but emotions are completely tied up in our movement. So the thing is to have some compassion with yourself, of like, no,
Right.
you're not scared of everything. You just haven't been flexing this. And so the thing to do is you just start really, really small. And to also identify, what kind of fear are you dealing with? So I had my teeth falling out, physical fear story, but I also had a fear of looking like an idiot in front
Yeah.
of people that I would then have to turn up and film the next day. And I wanted to kind of like retain my status of like, oh, hi, my name's Julian, I'm a cool independent filmmaker. So it was like, I don't want to be like, Julie's, like,
She
Julie's
was
she's a
rubbish.
disaster. She's scared of everything, falling over, couldn't do anything. And the reality is that what people value is your effort and your heart.
Trying.
They
Absolutely.
value the bravery.
Yeah.
They value your vulnerability to show up and move the dial 1%.
Yeah.
And that's why I love kind of movement cultures that really celebrate effort. And I have very little interest in
Yeah.
anything standardized competitive
Goal
measures.
oriented.
I'm
Yeah.
just like, nah, don't care. And I think because I spent at least 10 years, I spent over a decade with some of the most elite movers in the world, who for them, it was actually like, once you've reached a certain physical peak, the motivation to keep moving and exploring and maintaining is actually based on your emotional journey, this emotional and movement journey, this body mind unity, rather than, anyone who's kind of, and we're talking to people, and we're people who are movement for life. And so if you're stuck in a competitive movement mindset of, well, unless I can do X, I'm a success, and therefore when I don't do X, I then become in the Y group, and Y group, well, they're losers, so I have no
That's
value
failure.
and
Yeah.
self-worth. And it's
Black and
like,
white. Yeah.
shut up. Like that
Yeah.
is the worst kind of self-talk. And it devalues movement, it devalues your potential. So an example to give you a statistic is, so people who are scared of falling are 70% more likely to fall,
Yeah, I'm
which
sure.
is just
Makes
awful.
sense.
And
Yeah.
so, and I've seen it play out in parkour workshops. I had one lady who came and all she talked about was injuries. She was just like, scared of getting hurt. I'm scared of getting hurt. I'm scared of getting hurt. I'm scared of getting hurt. And she's from the moment she arrives, I'm scared of getting hurt. I'm scared. And she was in her early 30s. And I had to say several times, like, please stop. Like, and I had like at the time, like a 0 injury in anyone getting hurt in any of my classes. And 5-10 minutes before the end of the class, she had what we call a shinjury. So she was jumping from one wall to another. She
Ooh.
didn't make it. She didn't hit the wall.
Yeah.
Shinjury.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you've been telling your body you're going to injure it for the last 2 hours. And you did.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of really interesting work of, where you put the mind, the body follows. So there's this emotional journey. So we want to start really small, because what we're having to unlearn is that, okay, if I do this thing, something bad's going to happen. So we have to do a really small thing many, many, many times. And what that does is it gives us this message that reinforces, when I do this, nothing bad happens. When I do this, nothing bad happens. See, body, see, mind. Look, when I do this, nothing bad happens. So the way that parkour evolved was, and the way people still train a lot of these things is, you do very, very, very high numbers of repetitions
Right.
of small things.
Small things.
And you build them up tiny, 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 tiny. So there's none, it's the complete opposite of strength training. So strength training is like 5 sets of 5 reps. We're talking like 101 little jumps, really small. Because also the way your body feels after the first 10 is really different than how it's going to feel between reps 25 to 65, and then how it's going to feel from 65 to 100. But they're so small, and you don't have to do 100. Like, you could do like 21 and then rest a little bit and then do another 10. And what I really like, and this came from the Yamakasi group, is the last repetition you do, you dedicate to someone else, because it then ties into this idea of being strong to be useful. And we can get caught up in our own story, and we can, it's all about me, and this is me, and I'm tired, and my leg and my knee, and what do I think about what other people think of me? And here's the thing, no one else has cared. Everyone else is so self-obsessed. No one's watching you. No one cares. No one, like, everyone's caught up in their own thing. But if we can be a little bit more altruistic also in our movement, it also allows you to kind of dig a little bit deeper. And so when I took up running, I retook up running when my uncle was in hospital. And it was a way for me to kind of calm myself and manage my day, other than like spending 7 hours a day in the hospital. He'd broken his neck and he had dementia. And it was a big, like, wow, and my parents happened to be in New Zealand. Like, they were literally on the opposite side of the world. So I was next to my uncle, who I loved so dearly. And so I would run every morning on the moors. And when I would get tired, I would just think of my uncle. And I'd be like, I'm not tired. Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah. Like, and then what's really good is you start to set yourself, again, tiny goals. So if you think, I'm tired, right, I'm just going to run to that next tree. And then you make it to the tree and you're like, well, maybe I'll run to that other tree over there. And then you run to that tree. So the way our dopamine motivation systems work in our mind is, we need to set tiny goals. And then when we achieve them, we get a big, like, check.
Applaud
and it gives
yourself.
us a little boost.
Well done.
Yeah, it's like, good work, Julie. Whoop. So really, really celebrate. And that's another thing to unlearn, especially if you're someone who is, maybe degraded as like, oh, you weren't picked for the sports team, or we're giving these stories of like,
you're not sporty, or because you said you referred to yourself as sporty.
Yeah, I was sporty.
But the vast majority of people would say, I'm not sporty. So their label is already, from such an early stage, almost I'm not capable of moving my
Yeah.
body.
And it's
And yet
nonsense.
it's nonsense, because that's
Yeah.
about specific siloed sports that
Yeah.
take, and talking about repetition, that's, you know, for each of these sports, you have to repeat very specific patterns
Yeah.
over and over. There's some statistic that I certainly don't know, but it's kind of a bit like in the tennis world, you have to have hit 10,000 tennis balls in one way to even
Yeah.
think about being good, you know, and it's in that across all
Yeah.
sports
It's the
in a
10,000
sense.
hours of expertise
That's it.
for
That's
skill
it.
acquisition.
I
Yeah.
knew you'd get
It's all
it.
yeah, it's all Malcolm Gladwell stuff. It's all, and the thing is, you can like, we're all movers, and that's why I'm
We
about
come out moving. Exactly. We
we're all
literally,
movers.
if we didn't move, we couldn't survive.
Yeah. And so I like to say to people, you know, movement's like music. We can all play a different instrument. You can all have a different style, but never think that you're not a mover. Never think that you don't have a place in a movement culture. Never think that you can't change how you move. And the other thing to add in about fear and movement is how fear manifests in our body can be
Yeah.
really individual. So for me, I know, like, my knees actually knock. When I'm at height, I'm like a cartoon, like tuk, 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 tuk. And I've been climbing things. I've been on a climbing wall. I've been on the Dame de l'Arc in Paris, and my knees have banged against the wall. And the people below me can hear them, and you can see them. It's not one of those things where, like, can you see, you know, you feel like you're really shaking and someone's
And
like, no,
yet,
you look
no,
fine. It's
yeah.
like, you can see my knees knocking.
I have a cartoon image going on
Yeah,
here
it
with
is.
sort of the little movement lines either side
Yeah,
of the knees.
it is. It is. It's like, so I've got no teeth. The knees are knocking. It's all a disaster. And then, and I'm aware, you know, I'll then start mouth breathing. You know, our breathing pattern changes. My stomach jumps up to my throat.
Yeah.
So I physically shake. My breathing turns to mouth breathing,
Your
and I
heart's
become,
going.
my heart rate's up, and I'm very tearful. I'm very tearful very, very easily.
Yes.
And so again, we're training our emotions here, and they're inherently tied in to our mind and our body and where those emotions are held. So number one, I know that if I can just shut my mouth, I can move my fear base. So our amygdala, the part of the brain which processes fear, when we're mouth breathing, that triggers more activity in our amygdala. So you're scared all the time, close your mouth.
Nose breathe.
Retrain your breathing, your nervous system, your breath, your emotions, one great big feedback loop. And then to also notice, like, do you freeze? I've been climbing with friends, and
Yeah.
I got up to a climbing wall. I got up to a certain point, and I was like, can't make it to the next hold up. And my friend
I'll
was
go
down
down.
below, and he was like, we need to come down. And I was like, no. And this was at Mile Climbing Wall in London. And
Oh,
Andy
goodness.
Day was my friend, and he worked there, and I was with all my parkour friends who are great climbers and doing great things. And we kind of had a standoff for about 20 minutes, and I was stuck on the wall.
Yeah. And
And
that's an interesting word, stuck, because
yeah,
that's a very physical, stuck
yeah,
in place, no up, no down, panic. Where's the way out from this?
yeah,
And yet that's how people feel a lot of the time about not being up a high wall,
yeah,
just not being able to see any path out because they are frozen,
yeah,
in emotionally frozen, that
yeah,
because they don't have that courage, or they don't think they have the courage because they don't know how to be brave.
yeah.
And there is only one option. No, there's two options in that situation. There's up or there's down,
Well, there was
because
three.
there's no
There
middle.
was,
Is there
there
a middle
was
unless you jump?
the middle was to persuade my friend to come up and help me,
Yeah.
which after 20 minutes he did. But the most interesting thing was his initial comment was, Jules, your decision making turns to shit at heights.
Okay, we've learned
And it was
something.
like, you're not wrong. Yeah. And so I know that when I start to have a confusion about decisions, that's an early warning,
Yeah.
clear and present fear. And so the standoff was, and he did amazing. And I think because I knew that I think I could persuade him to come up and basically create a fake hold. So he came up and I literally kind of just stood on his shoulder and got to, like, that created another foothold that could then take me down. And it made me realize, well, I learned that I need enough energy to come down and not just go up. And I need to practice more ups and downs. And the next time we went to the wall, I could do it and go all the way up. And also to give ourselves time. And again, I was with people who made me feel safe. I was with people who were never just going to leave me hanging on the wall.
Yeah.
I was with people who were never going to let me get hurt. I was with people who knew me and knew my boundaries. Like Andy knew, like, she's stubborn as hell. Like, okay, like
Something big's going on here.
if I have to stand here for 20 minutes, I'm going to stand here for 20 minutes because she's going to hang on for 20 minutes. And I have other friends who, they'll literally, like, we're not objective about what we can do because we're living the emotions of it. But a lot of the times there's a more of an emotional barrier than a physical barrier. And other people are better barometers of our physical capacities than we are because they're not clouded with our stories.
Emotional stories, yeah.
So it's a thing that would happen a lot in the parkour world is if there was like a jump, for example, or a movement, and someone would say, I can't do it. It'd be like, physically you can, you're just, at the moment, you're just scared. And it's like, okay. And a lot of the times we don't spend enough time with something, like literally staring at it, walking up at it, and then like walking away again. And I had this experience so many times myself, and I witnessed it with others, where I gave it so much time that I actually got bored of the version of me and my story that wasn't brave enough to do it, even though I rationally knew I was physically capable of it. I was physically capable and scared.
So that's kind of like a familiarizing, isn't it? It's where we all need to visualize before. That's the whole, I don't know what it's about until I'm there, until I sort of see it, feel it, hear it, and so on. So I'm in the environment. So there's the fear of the unknown before. And then when you're there, it's, and you know, almost touching the wool, the whatever the thing is, it's allowing yourself to be around that wool, to feel the height next to you, I presume, to just
say
really
hello.
familiarize your body with that piece of nature, the world, whatever.
Yep.
And that's probably quite a real, a nice thing for people to take away, that we talked about trying things lots and lots of times, but also just familiarizing yourself and allowing yourself to not have to do the thing yet.
Yeah.
To know, to intend to do it at some point, but to build up slowly by thinking, I would like to go on that thing, go over that thing, do that thing, but I'm just going to do this version of it first, lots of times. And then I may have more confidence to think, actually, if I'm capable of this, then maybe I'm even capable of that. And start to feel good and reassure themselves that at some point they could dare to dream.
Absolutely. And there's a really cool thing that happens when you actually put more of your body in contact with the location. So this kind of habituation of the more tactile, the more sensory experience you have. And then to also know that, like, it's okay if today is not the day.
Yeah.
And again, it's self-knowledge. Like, am I physiologically tired? Am I scared? Am I emotionally tired? Have I slept well? Or am I just a pregnant nun who's making lots of excuses and today's absolutely a fine day to do it? And then we're just left with our choices. And again, to give yourself time. Like, I had to, like, it was about an hour and a half, 2 hours in this one playground doing this one, and it was going down this kind of weird tube shape in this playground where you had to like hang from the top, and to kind of drop down, you just had to like curve your spine a bit. And I had all these fears about I'm
And
going
go
to
with it.
bang my spine, break, my teeth are going to fall out, homeless, 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 blah, 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 blah. And I could do it when I leaned forward and grabbed like a forward rail. But the challenge was to do it and grab the top rail. And all my friends had done it, and they were like, "Oh, Jules, you've got this, you've got this." And I'm like, I'm scared. And I would go and I would do it, and I did. And then at the last minute, nope, I'd go to the kind of option 2. And then I would like walk around and do something else. And my friend Thomas was just like, "Well, I'm going to stay here until you do it." I was like, shit. And I know you're being like, you will. Like, even if I go home, you're going to stay. I know you're going to stay in this playground.
And did you take that as I believe in you, or did you take that as pressure?
No, I believe in you. Yeah. It was a complete generosity of someone else's time and belief and confidence that encouraged me to give it more time, which is, like some people, they'll say there's one move they're scared of. I'm like, go and spend 2 hours just doing that one move. And they're like, what, an hour? Like doing one thing? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, oh, but normally when we do that for like 5 minutes, I'm like, well, that's why you're emotionally not changing anything. Like,
but
it doesn't.
He could probably see that you wanted to, and that
and he could see that I
felt capable, but he could see that barrier. That was
because he's got years in the game of these fear games and making friends with fear, and all this parkour movement journey is just a self-knowledge journey of how do you move through the world mentally, physically, emotionally, and fear is a really cool part of that.
And harness your fear so that it's like, actually, if you don't have that fear and you can't work with it, then you can't embrace those. And fear and excitement are kind of, they have that same physiological response.
Sometimes it's like a little spider sense, like, oh, but like I'm a bit scared. It's tingly and excited,
scared, but it doesn't have to. So good, exactly.
It doesn't have to be like paralyzing fear, but you're still saying hello. You're still habituating to fear, and then you can manage your emotions. So I know now, for example, like, okay, number 1, control your breathing. Number 2, keep your eyes open. Then what I do is I close my eyes and I visualize one of my friends doing the thing. And I know they're like every habit. I know, like my friend Auntie, like I know what she'll do with her hair, what she'll do with her hands, what she'll do with her feet before she does a jump. And even in places she's never been, I visualize her doing it. And then
do you think that having a partner like that is a really good way to get started with something as well? Because then you're in a sense mentally holding hands as you're doing the thing.
100%. Like our mirror neurons are really fired.
I love that. I've never heard of that before. Mirror neurons. I'm gonna
so in the same way,
look that one up.
I don't want to go behind the person who's walking on a railing and wobbling and falling off, because if they fall off, I'll fall off. You yawn, I yawn. I'm very empathic with those things. But also I can use that to my favor. I'm like, oh, you did that well? Okay, hang on. And sometimes I'll get my friends to go like, okay, can you just do it 3 times in a row? And then I'll commit to once. And they're like, okay, if that's what it's going to take. So there's a lot of love and community when you start inviting in challenge on a regular basis.
And I love what you said. There was the lady in your class had said, no one's asked me to be brave for a long time. And that was very interesting because she obviously hadn't asked herself to be brave, but she'd also not had anyone else asking her to be brave. So this podcast called Make Movement Matter. And I think we've both really chewed at the topic of fear because it's such an important one in terms of movement. And you've talked about this doing something with a friend, having someone that you trust to help you through that journey, perhaps so that you can be more honest, being small in your movement so that it's a gradual conditioning so that
Yeah.
you are teaching yourself slowly and carefully, and so that there's that repetition, so that you're continually saying to your brain and your body, nothing went wrong, I'm all good. Is there anything else for the person who's even further back than that, who knows fear is a barrier for them, really wants to get started? What would you say to that person as your final words of wisdom?
I would say it's completely normal to feel overwhelmed by an idea of fear. And number one is that having the awareness of it is the first step towards change. And I would invite them to see if they can then identify what is the friction point between you doing nothing and you doing the tiniest thing that no one else will even see as a thing. So, what is the one little movement bravery thing you could do? And what is the friction point that is maybe stopping you? So, like in my kind of early part of not the kind of, like, oh, do this jump or this climb or this balance type of bravery, but the more like freedom in my movement in the environment bravery was to instead of running around the edge of this field, I was going to run in zigzags. I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And even, and just on like the last lap before I leave, and like no one's looking, just gonna do a little zigzag and get in my car or my bike and go home. And so I feel like just these emotional moments of how and where we move are bigger obstacles than people give them credit for, and to realize that nobody cares. And actually,
So true.
people love it when they see it,
They're
because
empowered. They are.
most people they don't want to go and do crazy shit. They want to just have more freedom in their movement and abilities, and to know that they can reconnect to this side with them. And maybe it's something that I've worked with clients who were never, who even as children they can look back and say like I was never brave, I was never adventurous, I was never this, and now they're like, I love monkey bars, I want to like, and that's, they've discovered this. So it's never too late to explore these ways that your body can move. And every single human being has fear, and it's really good. If they don't, they have a psychological condition. And like to have a very small amygdala is a very, it's a thing that some people have, and it's really normal, and it's all relative. And to the people who you see doing really big things, they are just as scared as you are. It just happens on a different scale. So what it takes for them to invite bravery in is different than what it takes me, but you are both experiencing the same thing. So just start small, make friends with it. Just make friends with it, and it's really normal.
I love that. So good. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I could talk to you for hours.
Always a pleasure. I know we could always do
very
hours and hours.
difficult to stop because I just want to keep going. But we will do that in another episode, I'm sure. But thank you so much for joining us. And I will put all your contact details in the show notes for people for where they can find you. But just say your contacts now so that people have heard.
So you can find me at julieangel.com. I have a very long Instagram title, which is Julie _angel _PhD _movement snacks. So you can just go to julieangel.com. On Facebook, I'm Julie Angel Movement Snacks. I actually have a Facing Fears PDF guide, a movement snacks guide.
Amazing. Okay.
So I'd be happy to, and just go small, say hello. It's all normal. Movement's emotional.
It sure is. It sure is. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I always love hearing my guests' movement stories or learning from them about topics they're passionate about. I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again. Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.